On December 26, 1973, moviegoers lined up for the premiere of a movie that would shock even the staunchest movie critics and become an iconic turning point in horror films. The New York Times reported, once inside the theater, a number of moviegoers vomited at the graphic going on the screen. Others fainted or left the theater, nauseous and trembling before the film was even half over. One woman even had a miscarriage. The Exorcist quickly gained a reputation as a horrifying, salacious film that transformed horror film history and even garnered a response by the Catholic Church. The film's original release grossed $193 million in 1973 after being initially released to only 24 theaters. That's the equivalent of $1.4 billion today, a massive and shocking success. But did you know that The Exorcist was based on a real exorcism? In 1949, Father William S. Bowdern conducted a series of exorcisms on a young boy who is only referred to as Roland Doe or Robbie Mannheim to protect his identity. But that's not the only spooky story around the filming of The Exorcist. The filming itself was plagued by accidents, hauntings, injury, and death of cast members and crews. The site of the filming is still rumored to be haunted. Today we're on the highway to Washington, D.C. to discuss the life and exorcism of Roland Doe, the hauntings and mishaps of the Exorcist filming location in Georgetown. We're going to cover the history of exorcisms in the Catholic Church, what's required to have an exorcism, the deaths and hauntings associated with the movie The Exorcist, and of course, some incredible travel recommendations at the end. Buckle up, y'all, and let's get spooky on today's classic horror film and haunting edition of Highway to Hell. Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hell, the travel and true crime podcast, and obviously a little paranormal stuff as well. My name is Monty, late bloomer horror fan, Stephen King aficionado, and previous pre-law student. Fun fact about me. I at one point thought I would work in D.C. in constitutional law. Considering what's happening in the country, maybe I should have, but I chose to be a rock artist instead. I'll be your host, and I'm so excited for today's episode. After last week, I needed something a little bit lighter, and it's saying something when demon possession is your lighter topic. Before I dive into our story today, a little bit of announcements. Highway to Hell officially has social media pages. You can find it at Highway to Hell on Facebook and Highway to Hell Pod on Instagram. I'll be posting all the photos I include with these videos there, and some cool in-between show tidbits, some real-life true crime, things like that. There's also a new email for the show. Comments, feedback, and stories can now be sent to highwaytohellpod@gmail.com. It's getting so official in here. And if you're watching these on YouTube, please know that the episodes will always continue to be available on YouTube. I'm working on changing my filming setup where it won't necessarily be filming of me until I can get into a studio. I've been having a lot of issues with just coordinating lights and the video and the editing all within the same software. So I'm working on remedying all that. I'm actually working on getting into a studio, getting a co-host, all kinds of fancy pants things. So please know that the video and the pictures will still be up on YouTube. It just may not be a video of my face all the time. Maybe sometimes, but not today. It's just this scary picture taken from The Exorcist. I loved researching this episode between my background growing up in the church and my love of the paranormal. It's perfect. So let's start with the history of exorcism. The practice of exorcism traces back to early Christianity and even earlier to ancient Judaic traditions. In Mark 5, 1-20, Jesus himself is depicted as casting out demons into a herd of pigs, demonstrating his power over evil spirits. And while there are stories of casting out demonic possession in evangelical Christianity, the official practice and regulated ritual of exorcism rests with the Catholic Church, which is where I'm going to focus today. As Christianity spread, the practice of exorcism became more formalized. Early church fathers such as Tertullian and Origen wrote about exorcism in their theological works. Tertullian, for instance, in his Apologeticus, described exorcisms as a means to prove the truth of Christianity over pagan religions. During the Middle Ages, the belief in demonic possession and the practice of exorcism became deeply ingrained in Christian theology and popular culture. The Roman ritual, a compendium of rites for the sacraments and other religious ceremonies, was compiled, and it included prayers and guidelines for exorcisms. This was the first time that exorcism was given any kind of formal structure. This period also saw the rise of infamous exorcism cases, often linked to accusations of witchcraft and heresy. The issue here was that those who didn't follow social norms or those who had mental health disorders were often assigned the condition of demon possession due to the lack of medical knowledge and were often killed during these rites. Humanity just didn't have the medical knowledge that we needed yet. The Renaissance and Reformation periods brought renewed attention to exorcisms, partly due to the clash between Catholic and Protestant beliefs. The Catholic Church reaffirmed the importance of exorcism, distinguishing it from Protestant skepticism. The 20th century brought some of the most widely publicized exorcism cases. One such case was that of Emma Schmidt, pseudonym was Anna Euclid, in the 1920s in Iowa, USA. Her exorcism was performed by Father Theophilus Reisinger and was detailed in several accounts, highlighting the intense battle against perceived demonic forces. The case of Anneliese Michel, 1952 to 1976, in Germany, is perhaps the most famous modern exorcism and a critical turning point in modern exorcism as it raised questions about legality and responsibility for the safety of the person experiencing the exorcism. I'm going to take a little brief side quest into this story as it dramatically impacted the history of exorcism and changed the Catholic Church, what the Catholic Church did to protect those with mental illness from harm during an exorcism rite. Anneliese Michel was born on September 21, 1952, in Liebfling, Bavaria, West Germany. Raised in a devout Roman Catholic family, she was described as a sensitive and religious young girl. In 1968, at the age of 16, Anneliese experienced her first episode of losing consciousness and later started experiencing convulsions. She was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition known to cause seizures, memory loss, and hallucinations. Anneliese was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she was treated for her condition, but her symptoms did not improve significantly. Despite medical treatment, Anneliese began to report seeing demonic faces and hearing voices telling her that she was damned and that she would rot in hell. Anneliese became increasingly convinced that her condition was not medical, but spiritual, believing that she was possessed by demons. By the early 1970s, Anneliese's condition had deteriorated. She became intolerant of religious objects and places, a common symptom associated with possession in the Catholic belief. Her family sought help from the Catholic Church, requesting an exorcism. Initially, the Church was skeptical and advised continuing medical treatment. And an interesting note here, and something that has kind of been a pattern with exorcisms throughout history, is the power of suggestion. So if you're deeply religious, you grow up with these ideas of the devil and demons and spiritual persecution, so to speak, then it's very possible that if you develop a mental health condition, you can genuinely believe that it's demons when it could be paranoid schizophrenia. It could be one of the issues that the church had before science really caught up was, how do we tell the difference? Because if someone believes that this stuff exists from the get-go when they're healthy, then when they're unhealthy, they're much more likely to point to that being a cause. And that does seem to influence Anneliese's case to a degree. In 1975, after several years of worsening symptoms and numerous appeals from the Anneliese family, the local bishop, Joseph Stangl, granted permission for an exorcism. The exorcism was to be performed according to the Ritual Romanum of 1614, one of the official rituals of the Catholic Church. The exorcisms were conducted by Father Arnold Renz and Pastor Ernst Alt. The first session took place on September 24th of 1975. Over the next 10 months, Anneliese underwent 67 exorcism sessions, each lasting up to 4 hours. Holy shit! These sessions were grueling and physically exhausting for Annalise, who displayed behaviors such as speaking in different voices, showing extraordinary strength, and performing contortions and uncontrolled bodily movements. During the exorcisms, Annalise claimed to be possessed by several demons, including Lucifer, Judas Iscariot, Nero, Cain, Hitler, and others. These entities allegedly spoke through her, each with distinct personalities and voices. As the exorcisms continued, Annalise's physical and psychological condition worsened. No shocker there. She became emaciated and refused to eat or drink, believing that her suffering was necessary to atone for the sins of others. Her health declined rapidly, and she endured severe injuries due to her violent convulsions and self-destructive behavior. Here again, we see the power of suggestion. She believes, I'm a sinner. I have to atone for these sins. I have to suffer. She's already in the space where she thinks this is something that she has to go through. On July 1st of 1976, Annalise Michel died in her home at 23 years old. The official cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration. At the time of her death, Annalise weighed only 68 pounds. Following her death, there was public outcry, and the case attracted significant media attention. An investigation was launched, leading to the prosecution of her parents and the 2 priests that were involved in the exorcism. In April of 1978, the court found all 4 defendants guilty of manslaughter, resulting in negligence. The priests were sentenced to 6 months in prison, which was later suspended, and 3 years of probation. Annalise's parents were not sentenced to prison, as the court considered that they had suffered enough through the loss of their daughter. This was the first time that priests were actually put on trial for an exorcism. And so this is where legality really starts to change of like, okay, are you doing your due diligence? Are you protecting these people? Are you making sure that this is done safely? Really important turning point in the 70s. Annalise's case inspired the modern horror film The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and her case raises profound questions about the intersection of faith, mental health, and the responsibilities of the religious and medical practitioners helping these people. It highlights the challenges of diagnosing and treating conditions that could be perceived as spiritual or supernatural in nature, depending on what you believe. The case remains a poignant reminder of the potential consequences when religious beliefs and medical practices collide. Due in part to this case, in 1999, the Vatican issued an updated version of the Roman ritual, translating to of exorcisms and certain supplications. This revision aimed to modernize the language and procedures while reaffirming the reality of demonic possession and the efficacy of exorcism. So basically what they did is they took the Roman ritual, which was originally established in 1614, they updated it to make sense for the modern time, but also say, hey, we still believe that demon possession is real. We still believe in exorcism. The 20th century also saw improvements in the safeguards that the Catholic Church put into place to ensure that the ill received medical treatment first, and the possessed only received exorcism as a last resort. This was due in large part to the life and work of Father Gabriel Amorth, who is by far the most famous exorcist in history. Father Gabriel Amorth, 1925 to 2016, was the chief exorcist of Rome, performed or reported thousands of exorcisms, up to 60,000 in his lifetime, and authored several books on the subject, contributing to the public understanding and interest in exorcism. Father Gabriel Amorth was born on May 1st, 1925, in Modena, Italy. His full name was Gabriele Pietro Amorth. Raised in a devout Catholic family, Amorth was influenced by his faith from a very, very young age. His early education took place in Modena, and during World War II, he was involved in the Italian resistance against the fascist regime. A soldier first, fighting the forces of evil seemed to be a fitting calling. After the war, Amorth pursued his calling in the priesthood. Amorth was ordained as a priest on January 24th of 1951. Father Amorth's path to becoming an exorcist began in 1985 when he was appointed as an assistant to Father Candido Amantini, the chief exorcist of Rome at the time. Father Amantini, a Passionist priest known for his expertise in exorcism, mentored Amorth and guided him in the practice. Following Father Amantini's death in 1992, Father Amorth succeeded him as the chief exorcist of the Diocese of Rome. Father Amorth became renowned for his dedication to the ministry of exorcism. He claimed to have performed tens of thousands of exorcisms during his career, although he clarified that number later to include both major exorcism and simpler prayers of liberation. Amorth's approach to exorcism was deeply rooted in traditional Catholic teaching and the belief in the very real presence of evil and demonic forces. In his practice, Father Amorth followed the guidelines set out in the Roman ritual, a collection of rites and prayers for the various sacraments and blessings, including exorcisms. He emphasized the importance of discernment, ensuring that individuals seeking exorcisms were not suffering from psychological or medical conditions that could explain their symptoms. Amorth was super adamant about making sure that you have exhausted all medical answers before you pursue exorcism. Amorth's work helped develop safeguards to ensure that all medical assistance had been exhausted completely before pursuing the church. Despite this, he faced criticism from some people, particularly from the medical and psychiatric community, who viewed exorcism as potentially harmful. Father Gabriel Amorth passed away on September 16, 2016, at the age of 91. His death marked the end of an era for the Catholic Church's ministry of exorcism. He left behind a significant legacy, both through his writings and the countless people he sought to help through his ministry. His work continues to influence the practice of exorcism in the Catholic Church today, and many of his books remain popular, and his life and work are frequently cited in discussions about exorcism and spiritual warfare. If you have seen the movie The Pope's Exorcist, that is based loosely on his life. Now, before we get into our main story, let's talk briefly about what it takes to receive an exorcism. Like, how do you go about getting one? In early Christianity, there weren't really requirements for exorcism. There was nothing formal. It really relied heavily on the discretion of priests, who were free to interpret whatever they thought were signs of demonic possession. The problem here is that if the priest didn't like you, or you were a woman who was too outspoken, a priest could decide that you were demon-possessed, and you were just assigned that. And they could accuse you of witchcraft or heresy. Many of the observable signs they would use to justify early exorcisms were violent behavior, speaking in unknown languages, exhibiting supernatural strength. Exorcisms were modeled after the action of Jesus and the apostles, but there was no procedure. There was no formula. The ritual began to formalize between the 2nd and 5th centuries with an emphasis on specific prayers and invocations. At this time, specific priests would be trained and appointed as exorcists. So instead of just going to your local village priest, you would actually go find the priest who performed exorcisms. During the medieval period, the 5th to the 15th centuries, the church began to require a formal investigation to rule out natural causes and confirm the signs of possession. So there had to be multiple witnesses to this behavior, and now the church is actually trying to make sure, okay, is this person sick? Is someone trying to set them up? Or, what's going on? Which is great. They started. And again, they still didn't have like all the medical knowledge to be like, oh, this person's depressed. This person is a schizophrenic. This person is suffering from postpartum depression. They didn't know that, but they were trying. They were starting to at least exercise discernment, saying, hey, let's rule out physical conditions first and then go to the exorcism. The practice of exorcism became more standardized with the inclusion of specific rites in the Roman ritual. The 16th and 17th centuries saw increased scrutiny due to the Protestant Reformation, led to stricter guidelines and documentation. Exorcisms now required a bishop's approval. The Catholic Church reaffirmed its exorcism practices against Protestant criticism, emphasizing the importance of discernment and ecclesiastical oversight. Exorcisms are conducted with a heightened awareness of the need for legitimacy and extreme caution. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the church began to require medical examinations before an exorcism could even be discussed, and multiple church leaders had to be consulted for approval. That brings us to today. What you need to get an exorcism in today's culture. Don't play with Ouija boards, guys. At least don't do it alone. Know what you're doing. Requirements. Step 1 is a thorough medical and psychological evaluation. Modern guidelines, particularly those outlined in the 1999 revision of the Roman Ritual, require a comprehensive medical and psychological evaluation to rule out any non-spiritual causes. Number 2, Signs of genuine possession. The Roman ritual outlines specific signs of genuine possession, including speaking unknown languages, displaying superhuman strength, and revealing hidden knowledge. Hidden knowledge would be, for instance, if you're in the room with this person and they suddenly turn to you and they detail a deep, dark secret to you that you've never told anyone, or a memory from your childhood, something that they would have no way of knowing. That's considered hidden knowledge. With these increased changes, the 1999 revision modernized the language and procedures and emphasized collaboration between medical professionals and the church. The church is understanding we have to work with the medical community to make sure people stay safe. Also, the role of the exorcist became more clearly defined, with specific training and authorization required. The Vatican also established the International Association of Exorcists in 1990 to support and train exorcists. So once the signs of exorcism have been confirmed, multiple people have seen these signs of possession, then you go into the assessment phase. The initial assessment is a thorough assessment by medical and psychological professionals, again, to rule out physical or mental health issues. After this assessment, the consultation happens with an experienced clergyman to evaluate the spiritual aspects of the case. And in a lot of modern cases, these assessments will happen collaboratively. So anytime that a clergyman is meeting with someone, a doctor will be present in the room. Number 2, clerical approval. After all of this has been established, the local bishop must be informed and given explicit permission for an exorcism to proceed. An exorcist is typically a priest appointed by the bishop, often with specialized training in the exorcism rite. Number 3 is preparation. The exorcist prepares spiritually, often through prayer, fasting, and confession, and the exorcist gathers a support team, typically other priests, lay people, and medical professionals. Almost exclusively every exorcism is done with medical professionals on site. In most cases, they require a doctor to be in the room. And then they go in to conduct the exorcism. The Roman ritual prescribes specific prayers, invocations, and actions. The process is repeated as necessary, often for several days and weeks, until the signs of possession cease. Then there's a follow-up. There's continuous spiritual guidance and support for the individual and their family to make sure the symptoms don't return, and there's ongoing medical and psychological care. Okay. So now that we have a historical background on exorcism, we're going to dive into our main story, the inspiration behind the movie The Exorcist, after our mid-show sponsor break. This show is brought to you by Intravenous Solutions, Nashville's premier IV therapy and wellness center. IV therapy can help you recover quicker from heavy workouts or illness, treat the symptoms of dehydration, and improve sleep and give you healthy, glowing skin. Being on stage several times a week, working 2 full-time jobs, I can say that IV treatments keep me on my feet and are a lifesaver. Dr. Allen and his staff are so kind, they're so knowledgeable, and they make sure every appointment is welcoming and super easy. They also offer vitamin shots, oxygen therapy, Botox, filler, weight management, and mobile services. With 4 locations in Nashville, Hendersonville, Franklin, and their brand new location on 2nd Avenue in the Bankers Alley Hotel, it's easy to get high-quality care all week. So come party in Nashville and beat the hangover at Intravenous Solutions. Give the code Monty10 at checkout for a 10% discount on services. And we are back. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of this story. And just a reminder that the names here are changed to protect this young man's identity. But the story began in Cottage City, Maryland. Roland Doe was a shy, introverted boy who was particularly close to his Aunt Tilly, a spiritualist who introduced him to the use of a Ouija board, which he used regularly. I need to remind myself to share my Ouija board story with all of you. I was someone who never thought Ouija boards were anything until this past year. I definitely believe there's something now. On January 15th of 1949, things began to get strange. It started with Roland's mother hearing scratching noises inside the walls. Her husband, being a rational man, promptly calls an exterminator to check for rats, but nothing was found. The sounds continued and grew from scratching noises to pounding on the walls. On January 26, 1949, Roland's Aunt Tilly dies from complications of multiple sclerosis. After the death of his aunt, the noises intensify, but are centralized in Roland's room. The family hears marching towards Roland's room, banging on the walls, and Roland's mom finally yells, "Tilly, if that's you, knock 3 times." And reportedly, there were 3 knocks. As the disturbance continues, they escalated to more alarming manifestations. Dishes would fly across the table, chairs would spin around and slide across the floor. Roland's bed would shake violently at night, and he exhibited signs of physical assault, such as scratches and welts appearing on his body without any apparent cause. Roland would start waking from night terrors, screaming in a voice that didn't sound quite human. Classmates that went to school with Roland reported that his books and papers would fly off the desk and that his desk would vibrate. Desperate for answers, Roland's parents first consulted medical professionals and psychiatrists, but no physical or psychological causes could be found. The family, who were Lutherans, turned to their minister, Reverend Luther Miles Scholes. Reverend Scholes was deeply interested in parapsychology and wondered if poltergeists, known to feed off the energy of adolescents, was wreaking havoc in the home. Since poltergeists don't typically move from house to house, Reverend Scholes had Roland stay over at his house on February 17th of 1949 to see if the activity would stop. As soon as Roland goes to bed, the bed started shaking violently. Thinking it could be a prank, the Reverend instead has Roland sleep in a chair. But the chair begins to shake and rock so violently that it spins around and throws Roland out of the chair onto the floor. 3 scratches suddenly appear on Roland's body after his stay with the Reverend, and his condition worsens. Reverend Scholes and his wife both confirmed that these incidents happened, and the Reverend now believes that Roland needs to see a Catholic priest about possession. The family then approached Father E. Albert Hughes, a Catholic priest at St. James Church in Mount Rainier, Maryland. When they visited Father Hughes, the priest reported that when they sat in his office, the temperature dropped dramatically, and the office became bone-chilling cold. His phone flew across the desk, and Roland reportedly said, "Why bother me, you priest from hell?" After observing Roland, Father Hughes contacted Archbishop Patrick O'Boyle in D.C. about an exorcism. The Archbishop reluctantly agreed. Roland is then moved to Georgetown University Hospital, and from February 27th to March 6th, Father Hughes attempts to perform the exorcism. An eyewitness from the hospital staff reported that Roland had been able to slip out of a hand restraint, grab a spring from the mattress, and stab the priest in the arm. The wound extended from the shoulder to the wrist and required over 100 stitches. After being discharged, Roland is sent home, and as Roland gets ready for bed, he screams as scratches appear across his chest, spelling out Louis. The family believed that this was a sign that they should relocate to St. Louis to stay with relatives. St. Louis was where his Aunt Tilly was from. On March 8th of 1949, the family had relocated to stay with relatives who were also devout Catholics, hoping to leave the disturbance behind. But it followed them. The same activity happened the first night. Books flew off the shelves, the bedroom shook, and Roland was screaming. A cousin who attended St. Louis University spoke to her professor, Father Raymond J. Bishop, a Jesuit priest and professor, and asked him to come see Roland. Father Bishop agreed. On March 11th, Father Bishop and Father Bowdern came to see Roland and his family. As Roland got ready for bed, Father Bowdern read several prayers, and there was no activity until the priest left the room. Suddenly, a vial of holy water was flung across the room and shattered, and a bookshelf moved to block the entrance to the bedroom. The priests were finally able to regain entry and witness the activity around Roland. Father Bowdern didn't originally want to perform the exorcism on Roland, but was requested by the bishop directly to perform it. Father Bishop, so there's the Bishop O'Boyle, and then there's a Father Bishop, which is hilarious. I really hope he becomes a bishop because Bishop is hilarious. Anyways, Father Bishop kept a rare and detailed diary of all of these events that were about to unfold to document the exorcism and the eyewitness testimony. That the idea was to use the diary later as kind of a how-to to really perform these rituals effectively. Much of what we know from this case is taken directly from this diary, and the book The Exorcist and the movie The Exorcist exist because this diary exists. As they began reciting prayers, the priest screamed when bloody scratches suddenly appeared on Roland's body. One of the primary goals of exorcism is to get the demon to give its name. Once you have its name, you can control the demon, but the demon in Roland would not reveal its name. Suddenly, Roland screams, and a brand-like burn across his stomach spelled out the word hell. After 2 nights of exorcisms, the priests arrived for a third night, and Roland began to snarl and growl and bite at the men that were trying to restrain him. Roland began to get sick and said he's leaving, and vomited violently, a symptom common in exorcisms and is often seen as a sign of liberation. But by 3:15 a.m., Father Bodern was called back when Roland woke up screaming, "He's coming back! He's coming back!" During one of the nightly exorcisms, Father Halloran documented that he saw the entire bed levitate 8 inches off the floor and slam back down. This type of activity was corroborated by a scientist and mathematician named Professor Frank W. Bubb, who worked on the Manhattan Project developing the atomic bomb. Professor Bubb, which is also a hilarious name, was invited to observe the exorcism and saw a nightstand lamp levitate from the floor before slamming to the ground. Hoping moving Roland would help with the exorcism, they move him into the rectory at St. Francis Xavier College Church on March 23rd of 1949. As time goes on, Roland can be barely restrained by 3 to 4 grown men. This is a skinny 13-year-old boy. And in a fit of rage, he breaks free and breaks Father Halloran's nose. There is a brief period of days where Roland seems to be improving, getting better, he's getting quiet. But on March 31st, he goes into hysterics and demands to be able to write things down. Frantically, he scrawls on large pieces of paper, "I will stay 10 days, but will return after the 4 days are up. I am the devil himself." Nobody knew what he meant. On April 1st of 1949, after 17 days of exorcisms, Father Bodern says the boy should be baptized as a Catholic. But as Roland is being driven to the church, he flies into a rage, reaches into the front seat, pulling the steering wheel, and attempts to wreck the car with him and his parents in it. He is eventually baptized, but gets increasingly more violent, repulsed by the holy water. 3 days later, Father Bodern says the family should go back to Maryland. He somehow thought if they could go back to where this all started, maybe they could end it. Bodern said he'll go with them and continue the exorcism under medical supervision. But he was unable to find any place in Maryland or D.C. that would take him. It was just too complex of a case. People knew about it. They wouldn't accept him. Instead, they took him to the Alexian Brothers Hospital in St. Louis and put him in a secure psychiatric facility. The Alexian Brotherhood is an ancient order of monks known for their secrecy. April 10th of 1949, Roland enters the hospital at the beginning of Holy Week. In 2014, an Alexian monk broke his vow of silence and spoke about the exorcism. He said that as he observed the 3 priests performing the rite of exorcism, the monk saw the boy's body levitate off the bed, and all 4 men could not pull him down. The monk detailed violent outbursts, glass shattering, and the boy becoming more and more violent, including being able to disintegrate parts of the priest's clothing. On day 29, Father Halloran takes Roland outdoors for air and a walk. They walk to the White House Retreat Center, where there's a path, and along this path it has statues following Jesus' path with the cross. So essentially it's different statues of Jesus carrying the cross, falling. There's these separate stations that the Catholics believe and observe, even in Jerusalem, that they believe follow the actual path of Christ. I studied abroad in Israel and have walked this path. The White House Retreat Center basically has a duplicate of that path. Roland is seized by a fit on this walk, and he runs and attempts to jump off a cliff. Father Halloran barely saves him, and when Roland calms down, he can't remember what happened at all. Over the course of 30 days of exorcisms, Father Bodern loses 40 pounds from stress and constant prayer and fasting. He looks emaciated, and his skin is bruised and boiled. April 16th, 1949, a monk places a statue of St. Michael the Archangel in Roland's room. St. Michael is the saint of protection and the triumph over evil. April 18th, 1949, 2 days after Easter of that year, in a particularly violent session, a demonic voice declares that Roland simply has to say one word to be free, but the demon declares he'll never say it. Suddenly, a clear, peaceful voice comes through Roland demanding that the demons leave. And a singular word keeps being repeated. Dominus, 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 which is Latin for Lord. Father Baudrin realizes that this is the word that they have to get Roland to say. And during a seizure that followed, Roland would later say that he had a vision of Saint Michael pushing the demons back to hell and saying to him the word Dominus. When Roland had become still, he said in a small voice that was entirely his, "He's gone." Father Baudrin, nervous that the demon had not fully gone, prayed for a sign that this was all truly over. An explosion rattled the entire building. One of the monks thought that the building furnace had exploded. Priests from a nearby church reported a vision of Saint Michael appearing over the altar at the time of the explosion. Father Baudrin took this as a sign that the exorcism was truly complete. All in all, 48 eyewitnesses attested to the events around Roland's exorcism. Now, exorcisms are typically kept incredibly private for the safety of the victims, but word started to get out. And in 1949, journalist Bill Brinkley wrote an article for the Washington Post about the exorcism, largely based off of the diary kept by Father Bishop, that detailed note-taking he was doing to document the exorcism and for the safety of everyone involved. This article in the Washington Post brought the case to public attention. The article caught the interest of William Peter Blatty, a student at Georgetown University who was an English major. Blatty later wrote the novel The Exorcist, which was published in 1971, drawing heavily from the details of Roland Doe's exorcism. Blatty's novel, though it's fiction, closely followed the themes and the events of the 1949 case. The gender of the possessed child was changed to a girl named Reagan McNeil, and additional dramatic elements were added to enhance the horror narrative. In 1973, the novel was adapted into a film directed by William Friedkin, which became a landmark in horror cinema and further cemented the legacy of the 1949 exorcism case. Totally unrelated, but what I'm learning this episode is to not drink Diet Coke while you're recording. I have, for the most part, health nut. I work out all the time. I drink a ton of water. I do all these things. But man, I just have this penchant for Diet Coke sometimes. And I'm constantly having to pause myself because I feel like I'm going to burp. Anyways, lesson learned. As I mentioned earlier, the filming of The Exorcist was marred by tragedy and strange occurrences. Be careful what you call forward. And in the place that I'm at in my life, I am forever the eternal skeptic. I believe that almost everything has a rational, of this world explanation, but sometimes there are things you can't explain. And even though my brain says 99% of the time you can find a logical, rational explanation, the fact that that 1% exists means you need to be careful. And I learned that with my experiences with the paranormal on my own, and also my experience with a Ouija board. I thought Ouija boards were jokes. I was like, this is ridiculous. These stories are made up. It's people just buying into mass hysteria. And when I used one, which was in a very safe space, which was protected by a guided practitioner, which was the only reason I agreed to use it. And when I led the session, I don't know why I volunteered for that, but I did. I led the session, and when that planchette started moving on its own, and I could confirm it was moving on its own, and it was moving fast, and I ended up having an entire conversation with something that claimed to be a person who died in the 90s, and I verified the story. It was a woman who died in a car accident. She had 2 kids. She had given me the ages and the initials of her children. It matched an article I found. When that happened to me, I was like, okay, this is serious. So be so careful when you're using spiritual tools like that. Like, I have a Ouija board in my house that I just use for decoration, but I literally have it displayed separate from the planchette because I don't want there to be any confusion about a session being open or inviting anything in. And if you do decide to use a Ouija board, look up how to run a session. Make sure you're protected. Never, ever, under any circumstances, ever use a Ouija board on your own. And always make sure you end the session by bringing the planchette to goodbye. Bring it to goodbye every time. Make sure you close the session, close the door. And if you decide to be foolish and reckless, because I know one of y'all is going to hear this and be like, well, why don't I just use it by myself? First, just don't. Some of the worst Ouija board stories I've ever heard is because people kept using it on their own. But if you decide to do it, you decide to be foolish. If the board planchette starts to move and it keeps going to ZOZO or ZUZU, get out of that session as fast as you can. I am so serious. If Zozo or Zuzu shows up on your board, bring the planchette to goodbye, salt the board, sage your house, get rid of the board. One of the most dangerous Ouija board demons that's been repeatedly documented goes by Zozo, and if he shows up, really bad things happen to you. Again, have I experienced it? No. Am I going to try it? Absolutely not. But it comes up in enough of different accounts in different countries, different people, different decades. Just don't risk it. Don't be silly. Don't be silly. But back to The Exorcist. So the filming of the show was marred by some crazy events. One of the most significant incidents was a fire broke out on set, which caused significant delays. The blaze occurred in 1972 and destroyed most of the set except for Reagan, the little girl's bedroom, which was completely untouched. There wasn't even smoke damage. The cause of the fire was attributed to a pigeon flying into a circuit box, which is hysterical. The incident was so unsettling, though, that the crew halted production for 6 weeks. Throughout filming, there was numerous reports of technical malfunctions, strange occurrences. Equipment would frequently fail without explanation. Lights would flicker on and off. Things would fall off walls. People would get injured. The director, William Friedkin, and others on set often spoke about an unsettling feeling that something was wrong, a sense of dread, and the sense that they were being watched. 2 of the film's main characters suffered severe injury. Ellen Burstyn, who played Reagan's mother, has a scene where she's thrown to the ground by her possessed daughter, and the harness that was used to pull her malfunctioned, causing her to fall and break her tailbone. So the scream of pain that she emits in the film where her daughter throws her is real, because she broke her tailbone and it was caught on film. Linda Blair, who plays Reagan, also suffered injuries during filming. In the same scene where she's violently thrashing around in bed, the rigging that was used to move her malfunctioned, causing her to sustain a severe back injury. Like the other actress, her screams of pain in that scene are genuine because the equipment malfunctioned. Most disturbingly were the deaths of numerous people associated with the film. Jack McGowan, who played Burke Dennings in the film, died shortly after completing his scenes. He passed away from complications related to the flu during an epidemic in 1973. His death was one of the first among cast and crew, fueling rumors that maybe this film is cursed. Vasiliki Maliaros, who played Father Karras' mother, also died suddenly shortly after filming her scenes. Linda Blair's grandfather died shortly after the film's release, which deeply affected her and added to the eerie narrative surrounding the movie. Max von Sydow, who played Father Merrin, also experienced a personal tragedy during filming. His younger brother died unexpectedly, and the cast and crew began to feel that the film was cursed. Given the eerie incidents, some of the cast and crew, including the director, sought spiritual interventions. A priest, Father Thomas Birmingham, who served as the technical advisor on the film, was asked to bless the set. According to reports, after the blessing, some of the strange occurrences subsided, but the overall sense of unease remained. During the film's premiere in Rome, there were so many reported strange occurrences. A storm with thunder and lightning struck the city. A church nearby was struck and hit by lightning. Additionally, several audience members fainted during the screening due to the intense and frightening content of the film. And what's interesting about this, so I am a late life creeper. And what I mean by that is when I was younger, like even through college, hated horror. I would not watch it. I would not read it. I didn't want anything to do with it. I was like, nope, 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 nope. And then in 2020, when I left New York and I was living in my car for 4 months, driving the country and hiking state parks, you get to this point where you're like, I can't listen to music anymore. And so I started listening to audiobooks. And for whatever reason, the first book I chose was The Shining. I was like, let me give it a try. I've never read Stephen King. And I was hooked. And ever since then, I am a certified creeper. I love horror. I love horror films. I'm like looking at my bookshelf right now, and I have an entire shelf just dedicated to Stephen King. It is one of my favorite books of all time. It's the first book I ever read that made my heart race, where I'm like, I'm so freaking scared right now. So, but it's incredible to me that someone can write that way. So what's interesting about The Exorcist is when this came out, this was truly, truly horrifying. People were getting sick in the theater, and in fact, I'm gonna post a clip that you can listen to. This is actually a attendant at a movie theater talking about his experiences during the premiere week of The Exorcist.
Incredible, especially with people fainting. Halfway through the movie, the movie starts getting quite violent, and people get quite unusual reactions, and we have a lot of people throwing up and a lot of people shuddering. But the thing that really surprises me is people faint. I mean, I've never in my life known a movie where people would faint. I mean, it's hard to make people faint.
Theater attendants started carrying smelling salts with them to revive people. People would come out of the theater and throw up. And the police, there were so many crowds though, so many lines to see the movie and to see it over and over and over, that the police were called because it became a safety issue. And the police were reporting, we've never seen people come out sick. We've never seen a response like this to any kind of film. Truly, truly interesting. And as I mentioned earlier, The Exorcist was filmed primarily in Georgetown, the neighborhood in Washington, D.C. And since that filming, many of the locations in Georgetown that were associated with the filming remain haunted. The infamous Exorcist steps that are located at the intersection of Prospect Street and 36th Street Northwest are these steep, narrow steps that lead down to M Street, and they played a pivotal role in the climax of the film. So if you've seen the film, these are the stairs where Father Karras throws himself down the stairs and he dies. Here's a picture of the steps that I took, and they're super steep and super spooky. And again, all these pictures will be on the new social media, so you can find them there. So this is a picture of the steps in the daytime. You can see they're very long, they're very steep. I went back at night because, of course, why wouldn't I? I couldn't get a good picture at the time because my phone at the time, the camera was broken. And I didn't experience anything that night, but it was very spooky. Like, the streets are quiet. Georgetown's very old. And then there's these big, but it's kind of like going down a dark alleyway at night. The alley could be totally safe, but it's just creepy. However, people who live near the steps and those who visit often report hearing strange sounds, such as footsteps and whispers, especially late at night. These noises are said to come from the steps themselves, which are otherwise empty. So they're hearing these voices, but they can't see anyone. Some visitors have claimed to see shadowy figures or fleeting apparitions on the steps. These sightings are usually accompanied by a sudden feeling of unease or really, really intense cold. The house that was used for the exterior shots of the McNeil residence is located at 3600 Prospect Street Northwest. Now, this is the exterior of the house. The inside of the house was mostly a set that was built in studio. But the exterior of this house is iconic, especially with the addition of a fake wing to accommodate the storyline. Residents and visitors have reported unexplained phenomena such as flickering lights, the sound of footsteps within the house, and people who visit the house or stand outside report a feeling of being watched. They'll see things move in the windows. Some people believe that the house has absorbed the film's dark energy, contributing to these sensations. Pets and animals brought near the house are also said to react strangely. They start barking at nothing, refusing to approach, or showing signs of distress. Dahlgren Chapel is situated within the campus of Georgetown University, near a lot of the places that the filming took place, and it's been reported to be haunted since the filming. Students and staff have reported seeing ghostly figures dressed in old-fashioned clothing. These apparitions are often fleeting and disappear when approached. There have been accounts of people hearing choir music emanating from the chapel when it's supposed to be empty. The source of the music has never been identified. Sudden drops in temperature and cold spots are frequently reported inside the chapel, especially near the altar and pews. These are often interpreted as signs of paranormal activity. So, when I look at the story of Roland Doe and all the eyewitnesses and all the documentation, can I look at that and say for sure this was a demon possession, this and this and this happened? No, I don't know. I wasn't there. But there's so much evidence. There's so much evidence to at least be like, this is, if people conspired to pull this off, then it was an incredible feat, because you were able to convince all these hospital staff and these priests and the parents and the family and the relatives and just bystanders to participate in corroborating this. And then the other thing is that for Roland's family, they didn't benefit from it in some way. If you've heard of the Warrens, who are, the demonologists and the medium who are responsible for the Conjuring universe, there's a lot of criticism towards them because of how much they've profited off of these stories. And I think that that's a completely reasonable objection. But Roland's family didn't make any money off this story because the movie was made off of a book adaptation. They never revealed their identities. Roland presumably has gone on to live a very successful, normal life, but has kept his identity hidden this entire time. That to me is significant, that whatever this was traumatic and harmful, and he just wanted to have a normal life. But I look at these hauntings of like the house, the steps, the chapel. I'm a little skeptical because I think people are kind of riding the wave of the movie and maybe not being honest. And I've been to these locations, and the stairs, the only place that give me pause because there's definitely a feeling there. But again, I didn't see or hear anything. These I'm kind of like, I don't know. However, little known historical fact, the location of the exorcism house is built on the site of a different haunted house. So Prospect Cottage was the site of several paranormal activities before it was torn down in 1940s. Prolific author, supporter of the Union and of women's suffrage, Emma Dorothy Eliza Nevitt, author of over 60 novels featuring heroines defying gender norms, we love to see it, moved into Prospect Cottage around 1853. This is the exact location of the Exorcist house today. Legend states that during the Civil War Battle of Bull Run, Georgetown residents were terrified that the Confederates would raid the city. Emma reportedly barricaded herself and her 2 children in the house. And Emma said out loud, "But there's only 3 of us here. What will we do if the Confederates come?" A voice witnessed by her and her children spoke from the darkness and said, "There are 4 of you here, and you will be fine." I would be scared so shitless if that was me. But she and her children in her house were indeed safe. Emma died in 1899, and her house was sold and made into an ice cream parlor. Here is a clip from a news article about the parlor in the Washington Post in 1905. Now the sitting room Mrs. Southworth planned is an ice cream parlor, and the handsome old drawing room serves as a cafe. On the veranda, visitors sit and chat as they wait for the cars. Their talk is of Mrs. Southworth, and it is claimed that they cut great splinters out of the porch and the side of the house, and even capture the bugs and grasshoppers in the yard for souvenirs. Furthermore, they carry and pull up the weeds by the roots and carry them off, happy with their ill-gotten spoils. This same article spoke of an Italian grocer who set up his cart in front of Prospect Cottage one day, and as he set up and he got ready for the day, Emma came out of the garden to chat with him. Since the grocer was local, he knew that Emma had died several years earlier. He didn't even wait to see what she had to say. He ran and left his cart and all of his stuff in front of the house. During the cottage time as an ice cream parlor, people would frequently say that they saw and spoke to Emma. She would be seen walking around the edges of the veranda, wringing her hands, and speaking and meeting with people. The author of that article also ran into a boy who said that when he walked by Prospect Cottage, he would see her looking out the window at night. And there you have it. A little spooky adventure around the true story and the filming behind The Exorcist. And now let's talk about traveling to DC. I actually really love DC. It's one of my favorite cities to visit. I was born and raised on a cattle ranch in Gillette, Wyoming, and my first trip across the Mississippi River was to DC. My dad took me and my brother and my best friend from high school and took us on a trip to DC. And for me, I was so fascinated with the history and the city and the subway, and I didn't realize it at the time. I was getting ready to go. I was a junior, so I had just turned 15, and it was the spring semester of my junior year in high school. And I didn't realize it at the time, but my dad later told me, he was like, taking you to DC, I realized that you were meant to be in a city and not in the country. Like, you're not meant to be a rancher's wife. And boy, was he right. But particularly for history buffs, DC is amazing, but also has just phenomenal food and nightlife. So we're going to jump in. And since most of our story today happened in Georgetown, and it happens to be one of my favorite neighborhoods in DC, I'm going to start in Georgetown. It's charming. It's a historic neighborhood. It has a lot to offer. But here's some of my favorite things to see and do in Georgetown. When I used to do fashion modeling, I modeled several times for DC's International Fashion Week, which was often hosted in Georgetown. So that's kind of my history there. The first thing I would recommend seeing is the Old Stone House. It is the oldest unchanged building in Washington, D.C., dating back to 1765, and is now a museum offering glimpses into colonial life. It's very interesting. It's a quick stop. You can just kind of pop in and see it. It's really great. And this is a foodie spot, Georgetown Cupcakes. Oh my goodness. It is a super famous bakery. Get there early because there is always, always, always a line that wraps around the block. But the line moves fast and it is worth it. And if you love yourself, which I know you do yourself a favor and get the cookies and cream cheesecake cupcake. It is unbelievable. I would consider doing certain illegal things for that cupcake. And then on M Street and Wisconsin Avenue, it's this long line of boutiques, really cute shops. There's high-end stores, there's restaurants, there's cafes. This is a great just like walkable shopping area that isn't in like DC proper. It's really nice. And of course, go see the Exorcist steps, which are in Georgetown. It's a popular spot. There's usually people around taking pictures, but at least pop over and go see it. The Georgetown Flea Market. This is actually one of the best flea markets I've ever attended, but it only happens on Sundays. So if you're in DC over a weekend, that's a great time to stop over there. It's a great place to find local vendors, which that's something I've been really trying to be diligent about in my life, is trying to find small business owners, small vendors. Georgetown Flea Market is a great place to do that, even if you happen to be local to the area. And my last little pit stop in Georgetown is Blues Alley. So if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that I love a good speakeasy and I love jazz. Like, I am a balls to the walls rock and metal singer. But when I go out, I just want to sit back. I want to rest. I want to just give me a nice Manhattan and some good music. Blues Alley checks all of those boxes. It's incredible. It's very intimate. It's a very old school jazz club. It's known for hosting legendary musicians. So if that's your vibe, then you need to go. You need to go see it. So let's talk about the rest of DC. And if you haven't been to DC, of course, go to the mall and all the monuments. They're well worth seeing. It's really incredible. But for this travel portion, I'm going to focus on my top 3 museums, restaurants, bars, and just another couple other little odds and ends. Most of the museums in DC are part of the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian Institute is the world's largest museum. It's kind of a museum network. It's a museum, education, and research complex. Has 19 museums, 21 libraries, 9 research centers, and the National Zoo. It was established in 1846 with the funds from the estate of British scientist James Smithson, who donated his wealth to the United States for the purpose of increasing and diffusing knowledge. Thank you, Mr. Smithson. How incredible. So the first museum I would recommend that kind of surprised me how much I loved it was the National Air and Space Museum. So it features historic aircraft and spacecraft. It's the Wright brothers airplane is there, Apollo 11 command module, the Spirit of St. Louis is there. And if you ever had a dream when you were a little kid of being an astronaut, it is so much fun. And it is breathtaking. It is enormous and breathtaking, and just, it is so cool as someone who has never been in a spaceship or never been anywhere near it or never seen a launch. It was truly incredible to be that up close and personal with it. My second museum, and it's hard to call this one a favorite. This is more something that I think is a necessity. So I've mentioned a couple times that I studied abroad in Israel. So I've seen the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, and I've seen the one in DC. And I recommend to everyone to go to the Holocaust Museum. Take a day, because it's going to take you a while to get through it. It's a big museum, and it's really heavy. Like, it's not as hard to process as the one in Israel, but go in there understanding that, like, your heart's going to break. It really gives a much more comprehensive look at what really happened during the Holocaust and the rise of the Nazi regime and what really happened to people. It's powerful and it's solemn, and I think that it's important to see those things for yourself. I think it's important that we remember how dangerous fascism and nationalism are. recently, not too long ago here in Nashville, I went outside my door and there was a Nazi march. And it was probably 60 to 70 young men. They were wearing masks, of course, because they're cowards, waving Nazi flags, screaming Heil Hitler. And with a lot of things happening in our political climate, man, there's a lot of things that are pretty damn similar to the rise of the Third Reich. And I think it's really important that we remember history and that we remember humans don't change that much. But man, within this museum, there's permanent and temporary exhibitions. There's survivor testimonies. There's this whole section of like what people did to them medically, which is so heart-wrenching. And for me, going through the museum, the part that like I started sobbing is they have at least they did when I went, they have this train car that's an actual train car that people were transported to the camps in. And in the train car and around the train car, and there's this little bridge where you can walk through it, there's all these shoes. And you look at these shoes, and there's so many. And these are shoes from victims. And what I noticed looking at the shoes, and I'm standing there and I'm crying, and I realized that none of the shoes match, which essentially doubles the number that I'm witnessing. It's heart-wrenching. But it's so important. So my number 2 would be the Holocaust Memorial Museum. And my third museum recommendation is the International Spy Museum. This one was so cool. So obviously it's about espionage and secret intelligence. And one of my favorite things about it is when you go in, they give you an identity. So you're given an alias, a backstory, who you work for. And as you go through the museum, there are people that will come ask you questions, and you're expected to maintain character throughout the entire museum. It's really cool. There's interactive exhibits and like extensive spy artifacts, like the things that people did to gain intelligence, to smuggle things. Like that's commitment right there. Like some of the things that like some of the things I saw for like anal storage so that they could sneak things in and out of countries in their butthole. I was like, they stuck that where? Excuse me? Well, we're seeing. And I want to throw in a fourth honorable mention museum that I haven't actually gotten to see, but I have only heard incredible things about it, and I'm really glad that we have it, is the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I have not, every time I have gone, like I went when it first opened, couldn't get in, it was totally sold out. And then the second time I went, it was closed there was like a minor renovation. But obviously it documents the African-American experience from slavery to the present day. There's notable exhibits including Harriet Tubman's personal possessions, a segregated rail car. Again, this is another thing where it's important to know your history. Know that this wasn't that long ago. I can't wait to go. But again, everyone I know that has been to it has only said incredible things about it. With restaurants, the first one I'm going to recommend is Old Ebbitt Grill. It's been operating since 1856. It's the oldest saloon and restaurant equivalent, because it started as a saloon, expanded into a restaurant, but it's been in operation since the 1850s. So it's hosted people like President Ulysses S. Grant, Theodore Roosevelt, and despite its age, the Old Ebbitt Grill is like super popular for everyone and anyone. They're known in particular for their oysters, and I don't eat oysters because they're slimy and gross, but their seafood and their food in general is really great. They have a great wine list. Their white wines in particular are very, very good. My second restaurant recommendation is the Tabard Inn. This has been operated continuously since like 1922 within its namesake hotel, which is the Tabard Inn. It actually earned landmark status in February of 2020. The hotel and the restaurant are both employee-owned businesses, and they're known for extremely high levels of service. The bar room is very much like there's these low-slung like wood beam ceilings, and there's cushy chairs and couches. It's like settle into the house kind of a thing. One of my favorite cocktails from them, even though I'm not usually a rum drinker, is one called Here Comes the General. It's a mix of blackstrap rum, Madeira wine, maple cinnamon, and chocolate. Also, they have cinnamon sugar donuts that are mandatory. Like you must, M-U-S-T, get the cinnamon sugar donuts when you go here. Okay, thank you. And my last restaurant is the Founding Farmers, because I love a good pun. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually a really incredible farm-to-table menu. It's been operating for a very, very long time as well, and it's one of DC's most reserved restaurants. It's owned by the Farmers Restaurant Group, and it's known for, especially for its brunch, but it's all locally owned, locally sourced. It's all seasonal. It's so, so delicious. And apparently I'm focusing a lot on sweets this episode. They have a beignet there. And again, you guys know how I feel about New Orleans. So I'm very particular about beignets. They have an Uncle Buck's beignet that comes with a choice of raspberry, chocolate, or caramel sauce. So I usually get mine with chocolate in New Orleans. So I was like, let me try it through. Oh my God, the raspberry. It's intense. I love it. Please go. Please go. Take a group there. It's a really fun restaurant. And then let's talk bars. I have a bar in here that I'm so excited to tell you about that most people don't know about, which I'm kind of surprised. But my first recommendation is the Service Bar. So this bar is so good that it's one of the top 50 bars in North America, like not just the US, in North America. It's got really inventive cocktails, and the staff is great. Like, it's ironic and not ironic, but it's really known for its service. There's regulars that go there, visitors, tourists. It's a lot of industry people go there. It's one of the best bars I've been to ever. The drink menu is arranged by spirits. They use seasonal ingredients. They shockingly have a fried chicken that's really impressive for a northern area. I would consider DC northern. And they do cocktail specials. It's just really, really incredible. Definitely recommend. Again, reminder that this is one of the top 50 bars in North America. The Silver Lion is one of the most inventive cocktail lists I've ever seen. It's built by mixologist Ryan C. I cannot pronounce his last name. I watched interviews with him, and I stalked him online, and I can't. This thing is like 18 letters long, but he's known as Mr. Lion. He chose Washington for this bar, and it's rated one of the best hotel bars and cocktail lounges last year. It's an underground lounge, and it's very luscious. It's very luscious. And they have the strangest ingredients I've ever heard of, like distilled emu neck. Did you know that was a thing? Because I didn't know that was a thing. They have smoked bee larvae. So, fun facts, fun times. And my favorite bar, the one that I don't know how more people don't know about it, but it's called The Mirror. So, of course, it's a speakeasy because I'm obsessed. And this is actually a hidden speakeasy. It's hidden in the heart of the downtown corridor. It's near McPherson Square Metro Station. And The Mirror is just out of sight from the sidewalk, looking out of a place. It's coming right out of what looks like an empty building. The clue's in the name. Hint, look for a mirror that kind of seems out of place. That's your entrance. So once you're inside, The Mirror is for the most part just a chill hangout spot. What do we know about me? I love speakeasies, and I love chilling when I'm not on stage. Here's the best part. So they play exclusively classic 1990s hip-hop bangers. Clips, Ice Cube, All About the Benjamins. It's amazing. The bartenders mix up a steady stream of throwback drinks. It's intentionally dark. It's lit by candles. And this was so cool. No phone flashes or flashlights are allowed. Put that shit in your pocket and pretend it's the 90s. Do it. You can thank me later. The rough wooden bar planks signal a no-frills approach. It's super laid back. And then there's leather sofas, low tables, glass chandeliers. It is awesome. One of my favorite places I've encountered in DC. And I didn't find The Mirror until like my 5th or 6th time going to DC. And the next time I go to DC, it's probably going to be my first stop. And my last little kind of honorable mention, being a book girly, because this place gave me Beauty and the Beast vibes. Go to the Library of Congress. Oh my God. Not only is like some of the most important literature, film, all the stuff saved there, like really documenting our history as a baby nation. It is breathtaking. It is breathtaking. And I'm in libraries all the time, and I love the peace of a library. and the calm. And just that combined with all of the history is truly, truly incredible. So book girlies, make sure you go do it. And that is it for today. A little adventure discussing exorcism, the true story behind The Exorcist, and the movie itself, all shot in Washington, D.C. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I actually watched The Exorcist while editing this episode, and it's been super, super fun. Just a reminder, please go follow those social media pages, Highway to Hell Podcast on Facebook, Highway to Hell Pod on Instagram, and the new email, highwaytohellpod@gmail.com. Also, just a little tidbit, I am looking for a local co-host. I would love to get someone who loves history and traveling as much as I do to be a co-host with me. I think it would just make it a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting. So if you know someone like that, doesn't necessarily have to be available for all the travel, but I would love it. Thank you for taking this drive with me on the Highway to Hell.